It's 7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. Joining me from Washington, D.C. is my colleague, Nick Harper. Good to see you, Nick.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C., 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we get the latest on the Ukrainian president's visit here to the White House as he pleads for more aid. And China and Vietnam agree to closer ties to counter Washington's influence. But first, the headlines.
Countries work to salvage climate deal after fossil fuel backlash on the final day of COP28 summit talks in Dubai. Second draft expected. COP29 to be held in Azerbaijan. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi urges extreme caution, safeguards from darker aspects of AI, while inaugurating the third Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence Summit in New Delhi. Britain's Rishi Sunak faces the biggest parliamentary test of his premiership as UK Parliament to vote over his Rwanda asylum plan. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy hopes to count on the United States for continued military aid on his crucial visit to Washington. Talks with President Biden to be closely watched by Moscow.
Putin must lose so that everyone else who sees Russia's war on Ukraine as his personal lecture at the so-called University of Aggression gets the message loud and clear: Putin must lose.
Up first, news from Dubai, where the 28th session of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP28, has concluded. A new document is in the pipeline as the countries debate on no mention of fossil fuels in the first draft, which was released on Monday and was deemed as the most critical document of COP this year. The first draft notably omitted mention of the phasing out of fossil fuels, and now the new one is on its way to get published. During the discussions on Tuesday, over 100 countries agreed to tripling their renewable energy capacity by the year 2030. This would bring global renewable energy capacity to at least 11,000 gigawatts in the next 6 years. It would also require high investments, as International Energy Agency had hit $600 billion globally last year. Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, COP28's Director General, said that the world is facing the most demanding COP agenda in history. The COP28 presidency remains steadfast in calling for the highest possible ambition, and they are relentlessly committed to helping the parties agree on the best possible plan for global good.
We've been seeking the right balance between those elements, but this is a process of the parties. It's a question of how ambitious the parties truly are and where they want the balance to be. That is what we're negotiating about. And while the presidency can guide, direct, and encourage, the level of ambition is for the parties to agree. When the new text is released, we will open to further feedback. The presidency is calling for the highest possible ambition, and we're committed to helping the parties agree the best plan they can for the world. We will keep you updated as best we can.
Meanwhile, the COP28 Climate Summit in Dubai on Monday approved a proposal to hold the next iteration of the annual event in the Central Asian Republic of Azerbaijan.
Dear Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored and humbled by the opportunity to address this esteemed gathering of the 28th session of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Our sincere gratitude goes out to the Convention Secretariat and the host country, United Arab Emirates, for their tireless efforts in organizing this extraordinary event. The challenges we face demand collective action and dedication to the commonly agreed objectives and aspirations. Azerbaijan understands the critical importance of collaborative efforts to combat climate change.
So countries at COP28 are still mulling over the text of this climate deal, which is expected over the next few hours, or at least one hopes so. DD India's John Beaver sent us this report from the COP28 summit in Dubai.
What role should fossil fuels play in a world trying to save itself from global warming? That's the key unanswered question here, with a number of very firm and very different viewpoints. For countries like Saudi Arabia, around half of their GDP comes from oil and gas. They and other oil-rich countries want to see more use of carbon capture technology to limit harmful emissions from traditional energy sources. But many scientists and developed nations, including the US and the UK, believe that drastically reducing the use of fossil fuels is the only way to stop global warming. And then we have developing nations who argue that moving away from fossil fuels is not something they can do without significant financial help from the world's richest countries. In the words of one observer here, it's not fair that Congo and Canada must phase out fossil fuels at the same rate. Countries most immediately affected by climate change, such as those liable to flooding, have said the continued use of oil and gas is a death sentence as sea levels continue to rise. All 198 countries have to agree on the final text that this climate summit is hoping to produce. One aspect that is being seen as positive, a wide-scale pledge by many countries to triple the amount of renewable energy that's produced by 2030. John Beaver in Dubai, reporting for DD India.
On to America now. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is in Washington. He will make his case for more U.S. aid against its war with Russia during meetings later today. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, a lot at stake for Zelenskyy as he appeals to Biden and other members of the Congress for aid.
That's right, Tanvi. Certainly is going to be a high-stakes day for the Ukrainian president. He's looking to get billions of dollars in aid. All of that, as Ukraine says, 73 battles have taken place between Russia and Ukrainian troops in just the last 24 hours alone. It added that the Ukrainian Air Force downed 9 of 15 Russian drones and 2 cruise missiles launched overnight, as well as destroying a Russian ammunition depot. Meanwhile, Russia said its forces attacked a Ukrainian arsenal and repelled Ukrainian offensives in the Kherson region. Well, here in DC, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is expected to make a crucial pitch to US lawmakers on Tuesday as the fate of billions of dollars of US assistance for Kiev remains in limbo. Republicans here say they aren't willing to approve the new funding unless the Democrats and President Biden concede to major immigration policy changes on the US southern border. DD India's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
On his third visit to Washington, D.C. since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, President Zelenskyy is making a last-ditch plea to Congress for more funding. The White House says the visit will, quote, underscore the United States' unshakable commitment to supporting the people of Ukraine. But time is running out to see that support continue. Republican senators last week blocked $106 billion in emergency aid, which was primarily for Ukraine and Israel, because the package didn't contain the immigration reforms they demanded. US President Joe Biden's warned that a failure to pass the new funding would hand Russian President Vladimir Putin a victory and embolden him to invade more European countries. Congress has already passed billions of dollars worth of military and economic funding for Ukraine, but securing additional money to help it continue to defend its country against Russia has become harder, as more Republicans have questioned the scale of the funding and how it's being used. President Zelenskyy has not yet been invited to speak in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, though he will meet the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and he's been invited to speak at an all-senators meeting on Tuesday morning. He's expected to give a press conference later in the day after his White House meeting with President Biden. Kate Fisher in Washington reporting for DD India.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's push for more aid is being closely watched by Moscow. Russia says it'll be watching the Biden-Zelenskyy meeting very attentively. The Kremlin also said that tens of billions of dollars provided by Washington to Kiev has failed to turn the tide of war, and sending more US aid won't be able to help Ukraine. Russian spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Kiev's failures on the battlefield led to rocking the boat within Ukraine and discrediting the authorities. DD India's Dasha Chernyshova sent us this report from Moscow.
Moscow is closely watching the results of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy's trip to the United States as Kyiv pushes for more help. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that despite tens of billions of US dollars pumped into Ukraine, Kyiv was unable to gain any advantages on the ground. Peskov added that the same will happen to other billions of US dollars that Kyiv hopes to attract to its economy. Russian Foreign Ministry called the new $175 million US dollars package of the American military assistance to Ukraine a real criminal scheme for withdrawing money, adding that it cannot work indefinitely. Russia's first deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Dmitry Polyansky, also said that providing military assistance to Ukraine has been a commercial project benefiting the United States. He also said that the American weapons in Ukraine will either be destroyed by Moscow or abandoned. Russian officials stressed that no matter how much aid, financial and military, Kyiv receives, Moscow will achieve the goals of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Dasha Chernyshova reporting in Moscow for DD India.
Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny's location inside the prison system remains unknown. Navalny again did not show up for a court hearing via video link. On Monday, his allies stated that they had not been able to contact him for 6 days. Navalny was expected to be transferred to a special regime colony, the hardest grade in Russia's prison system. In August, he was sentenced to an additional 19 years in prison on top of the 11.5 years that he was already serving. EU ministers met in Brussels on Tuesday to discuss Ukraine's highly anticipated EU membership. Hungary has opposed the opening of membership talks, stating the Commission has not done sufficient preparation to approve the start of membership talks with Ukraine. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who claims to have good ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin, has threatened to veto the aid. The meeting will be followed by a summit of leaders later this week on the 14th and 15th of December. Moving on now, China and Vietnam have signed 37 agreements during Chinese President Xi Jinping's latest visit to Hanoi, as Xi pledged closer ties between the two nations. The deal covers sectors including border rail development and trade. The two nations also agreed to conduct joint patrols in the Tonkin Gulf in the South China Sea. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping is trying to counter America's growing relationship with its old enemy, Vietnam. It's Xi's first visit to Vietnam in 6 years, just a few months after President Joe Biden was there. DD India's Andrew Wood sent us this report from Hong Kong.
Well, Vietnam and China have a lot in common. They're neighbours, their economies are increasingly integrated, and they're both run by communist parties. Nevertheless, Vietnam has traditionally been rather suspicious of its larger northern neighbour. For example, they actually fought a war back in 1979. China invaded Vietnam, and it had the embarrassment of being defeated by Vietnam. So there is this wariness, and I think that China has not done itself any favours by claiming all of, or pretty much all, of the South China Sea as its own territory, because that includes a large chunk of Vietnamese territorial waters. And I think that that's pushed Vietnam closer to America as a result. Remember, President Biden was in Vietnam just 2 or 3 months ago. Now it's the chance for President Xi to try to woo Vietnam back. As I say, the economies are pretty well integrated, although to be fair, Vietnam has been doing rather well out of some of China's problems at the moment. The more foreign companies want to decouple and de-risk from China, the more of them are actually moving their investments to Vietnam instead. So not great news for China there. Vietnam is a rival, but it's still much less developed, and President Xi is believed to be offering the chance to build a railway, a modern standard gauge heavy railway to link Vietnam to the railway network of China to replace old colonial lines. Now, President Xi Jinping is talking about a common destiny for Vietnam and China. No doubt he thinks that that sounds like an opportunity. There is a possibility, though, that the Vietnamese think that a common destiny for Vietnam with China might be more of a threat. In Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Wood, reporting for DD India.
Moving to the UK now, where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing a battle to persuade Tory MPs to back his flagship Rwanda bill ahead of a key vote. UK lawmakers will vote later on legislation aimed at reviving the government's Rwanda migration policy. It was struck down by the courts in November. DD India's Ollie Barrett reports from London.
It is a key day for Rishi Sunak's premiership, but also for his Rwanda legislation. He is spending the day trying to convince as many of his own Conservative MPs as possible to back him in this vote later. The difficulty that he has is that he has a group of right-wing Conservative MPs who say that the legislation potentially needs to be pulled and reworked. Some of them say they will vote for it, but it needs to be toughened up during later stages of the parliamentary process. Then there are others in the centre and on the left of the Conservative Party who say that they may be able to back the bill in its current form, but wouldn't be able to continue to support it were it to be toughened up in any way. And so the Prime Minister is being pulled in various different directions and has not very much room for manoeuvre. The idea behind the legislation is that it will deal with some of the concerns set out by Supreme Court judges when they ruled the Rwanda migration scheme unlawful last month. The idea of the scheme is to see some asylum seekers removed from the UK and sent to Rwanda for their claims to be processed there, partly as a deterrent to levels of illegal migration. No flights to Rwanda have yet got off the ground, and the Prime Minister believes that this legislation is key to seeing those flights starting to move ahead of the next UK general election. If Rishi Sunak were to have to pull this vote today, or if he lost this vote later on in the House of Commons, that would be a significant blow to his authority. Ollie Barrett in London, reporting for DD India.
Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Tanvi, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Nick Harper joining us from Washington, D.C. Still to come on DD India Global. Israel does not intend to stay permanently in Gaza. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said this as Israel was open to discussing alternatives about Gaza's future. And Iran's late Mahsa Amini, who died in police custody last year, and the Women Life Freedom Movement awarded the EU Parliament's Sakharov Rights Prize.
India that invents. India that innovates. India that excites. India that invites. Land of possibility. Teeming with opportunities. Watch India Ideas each Thursday, 8 p.m. only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Now, news from India. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the three-day third Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence Summit, GPAI, in India's national capital, New Delhi. The summit is a multi-stakeholder initiative with 29 member countries. It aims to bridge the gap between theory and practice on artificial intelligence. Addressing the summit, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed on the impact of AI on both present and future generations.
AI के प्रभाव से वर्तमान और आने वाली पीढ़ियां कोई भी छूटी नहीं है। हमें बहुत सतर्कता के साथ, बहुत सावधानी के साथ आगे बढ़ना है और इसलिए मैं समझता हूं इस समिट से निकले विचार, इस समिट से निकले सुझाव पूरी मानवता की जो मूलभूत मूल्य है उसकी रक्षा और उसको दिशा देने का काम करेंगे।
The Indian Prime Minister expressed extreme caution over darker aspects of AI such as deep fakes. The Indian Prime Minister also highlighted the advantages and benefits of artificial intelligence in today's world.
AI 21वीं सदी में विकास का सबसे बड़ा टूल बन सकता है और 21वीं सदी को तबाह करने में भी सबसे बड़ी भूमिका निभा भी सकता है। डीप फेक का चैलेंज आज पूरी दुनिया के सामने है। इसके अलावा साइबर सिक्योरिटी, डेटा थेफ्ट और आतंकियों के हाथ में एआई टूल्स के आने का भी बहुत बड़ा खतरा है। अगर आतंकी संगठनों के पास एआई लेस हथियार पहुंच जाए तो उससे ग्लोबल सिक्योरिटी पर बहुत बड़ा असर होगा। हमें इस विषय पर चर्चा करके एक ठोस प्लान तक पहुंचने की जरूरत है कि कैसे एआई के गलत इस्तेमाल को रोका जाए।
Updates from the Indian Parliament now. It is the 6th day of the winter session of Parliament. The Upper House passed the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners' appointment, conditions of service and term of office Bill 2023. The bill aims at shaping the framework for service conditions and tenure of Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners. The lower house passed the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganisation Second Amendment Bill 2023. The bill seeks to reserve 33% seats in the legislative assemblies of Jammu and Kashmir and that of Puducherry for women. Both houses were adjourned for the day. Further north in Asia, Israeli army released a video on Monday showing weapons from inside a mosque in Jabalia in northern Gaza. In the video, an unidentified member of the Israeli armed forces narrates some of the footage in which he exhibits areas within the mosque where the army said it found weapons and a Hamas training area. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Israel had no intention of staying permanently in the Gaza Strip and that it was open to discussing alternatives about who would control the territory as long as it was not a group hostile to Israel.
Israel will take any measures in order to destroy Hamas, but we have no intention to stay permanently in Gaza Strip. We only take care of our security and the security of our citizens alongside the borders with Gaza and elsewhere.
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. Iranian woman Mahsa Amini, who died in police custody last year, and the Woman Life Freedom Movement in Iran will symbolically be awarded the European Union's Sakharov Rights Prize. Amini's death sparked months of protests by women against the morality police and women's rights movement in Iran. Spanish police seized 7.5 tons of cocaine from Porto Vigo in one of the biggest drugs busts by volume in the history of Galicia in Spain. Reportedly from South America, the drug was hidden inside frozen tuna fish due to be distributed across Europe. A total of 20 people have been arrested. Close to 500,000 Afghan refugees have returned to Afghanistan from Pakistan over the past 2 months. The mass movement followed Pakistan's decision, where it gave undocumented migrants in the country time until November 1st to leave. The UN Refugee Agency issued a stark warning, cautioning that Afghans crossing the border from Pakistan could face life-threatening conditions this winter without adequate shelter. South Korean officials have urged that Russia should help impose new sanctions against North Korea over its recent launch of a spy satellite. South Korea's Unification Minister Kim Young-ho said last month's satellite launch violated UN Security Council's resolution banning North Korea's use of ballistic technology. They also called for enforcing existing bans on the isolated country's labor exports. Former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has won this year's Diwali Stamp Lifetime Achievement Award. The event was held at the UN headquarters. It acknowledges those who embody the spirit of Festival of Diwali and the light's victory over darkness. William Denslow reports from New York City.
Kicking off the awards ceremony, the head of the European Union's UN delegation, Olof Skog, said the event recognises those that have made a difference beyond the halls of the United Nations, encapsulating the spirit of Diwali. Back in 2016, the US Postal Service issued a Forever Diwali stamp. A year later, the Diwali Foundation established the Diwali Stamp, the Power of One Award, which is given to those deemed to have worked selflessly, partially at the United Nations in an attempt to create a more secure, peaceful and perfect world for all. The event's been dubbed the Oscars of diplomacy.
Let us remember that every small light, no matter how small, can make a significant difference in dispelling the shadows. Let this Diwali be a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, our ability to find light in the darkest of times, and our unyielding belief in the power of goodness.
The recipient of the Diwali Stamp Power of One Lifetime Achievement Award this year was former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who served in the role from 2007 to 2016. Dignitaries at the event described him as a global champion of peace and security. Upon accepting the award, Ban Ki-moon said it was a great honour and thanked those for advancing light in a world of darkness. William Denslow in New York, reporting for DD India.
And as we wind up this edition of DD India Global, we bring you Christmas festivities from Colombia. Some Colombian families were aboard the Christmas Express in Bogota, all boarded a steam train decorated with festive lights, with special guests including Santa Claus and the elves. In scenes reminiscent of classic Christmas movies, the steam-powered train chugged into a classic train station in the Colombian capital. The locomotive delighted youngsters and their parents, eager to share the festive joy together with their family. So that's all in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks air on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja. From my entire team in New Delhi, thank you for watching. Namaskar.